Welcome everyone. I'm gonna go ahead and take a seat here now since everyone else is sitting. Yeah, come on in and welcome and thanks everyone for being here. This is kind of a new experience for us, so I think I'm a little bit nervous, Jane, apparently. Okay. But we're happy that you're here. I just told Jane I was scared that no one was going to come, and now you're all here, and that makes me nervous too. But I do want to thank everyone for being here, and we are excited about this event and excited about our project here. I do want to say a few thank yous. Adam Akers, my brother-in-law, let us use the sound equipment here. Thanks to Derek for helping to set that up. The musicians later, Kelly Wirtz and others, I think Jesse and Ben. We'll be playing some music afterwards, so I'm excited about that. Thanks to Bria and Richard for running around and doing all sorts of things. Also, Ian and Candida, just doing lots of little details and helping out with stuff, so, and other people that I'm forgetting. And of course, thanks to Jane and Jason and Ian for being a part of this conversation and yeah, jumping into this project with us. So, I do want to start and kind of say something about our project here at the school, a project that we call the School for Rural Culture and Creativity. My wife Tia and I kind of started this project 3 years ago. We got control of the building, and then so we've been working on it ever since. And last year we incorporated as a nonprofit, and then fairly recently got our 501c3 tax exempt status. So you see where this is going, right? We could really use some help in the financial region if any of you would like to contribute. We have a number of sort of ongoing projects. I don't know if you noticed the hole behind our building here where the septic tank is conspicuously not, because we don't have one. So that's something that's kind of on our books that and we just put in some electric heating and air units in the printmaking studio, which is our first foray into any kind of heating for this building. And that kind of liquidated our account at that point. So if you think that you could contribute, you can do that online, but you can do it here today. We have a donation bucket out there, checks. Or if you're just interested in knowing more about the project or making maybe a larger contribution, you'd like to learn more about what we're doing, I'm happy to talk more in person, or you can talk to Tia too. But please, yeah, consider helping out if this is something that you feel strongly about. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, sort of on that account, you know, we don't have anything like paid staff here. Everything is volunteer, and a lot of the funds have just come locally and from ourselves. So it's not like we're withdrawing. We're drawing on a large will here. So, okay, that's my miniature pledge drive. Oh, I would say one more thing, that we are kind of planning on starting a sort of annual giving, membership kind of thing, possibly with a free gift print. And so that's something that if you would give money now, that would go towards that in the future. If we do that, you know, coming up in the next couple months, we're hoping to start that up too. So, okay. Now, I'm hoping that this event, which in some ways is kind of our first major event as an organization, I'm hoping this goes some way towards articulating what our vision or hope for this project is going forward. So predictably, people who come and visit, first question they ask is sort of, what are you doing here? Or what is this place? And I usually mumble something about art and gardening and community ping pong. And so I have trouble condensing some of our ideas into, a sentence or two. And I think that's partially because what we're really interested in is integrating really a number of different ideas, practices, even virtues that we think are helpful for our community, but helpful hopefully for other rural communities and some of the challenges that rural communities face. And so this, more expansive, kind of unwieldy vision can be hard to articulate, and that's why I brought these people up here with me. So it's your job. So I want, towards the end of this conversation, we're going to start by hearing more specifically from Jane and Jason about their farms, ranches, farming practices. But then I kind of want to come around and sort of rope them into this larger, broader question about what do rural communities need, sort of culturally, and sort of particularly around this idea of culture and agriculture that you saw from the sort of event name. Two words that, of course, have a linguistic connection, culture and agriculture, but most people don't see as very closely related. So that's where I hope to end up, and then kind of exploring that connection and bringing Ian into the conversation towards that end, at the end. And then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A after that as well. So, to open the conversation, I want to read a quote, just one sentence out of an essay by David Orr, an essay written in 1994. It was collected in an anthology. So the essay is almost 30 years old, and it's called Re-Ruralizing Education. A phrase that Jason really likes because it has so many R's in it. Re-ruralizing education. So you can kind of see that the title already connects a little bit to to the name of the school for rural culture, etc. In the first page of this essay, he says this: I do not believe that a democratic culture can remain healthy for long without rural vitality. Kind of a provocative statement. Given in the last couple of years, I think we've heard more and more sort of hand-wringing or questioning about the state of democracy in our country. And often that sort of then leads to people pointing fingers at this or that political player in the immediate news cycle. I think this quote suggests that there may be larger, further out causes or patterns at work that affect positively or negatively our democratic culture if we undermine or don't take care of rural communities. So, David Orr goes on to talk about something we're all pretty aware of, this idea of rural population decline. As late as 1950, he says half of Americans lived in rural areas, and by the time he was writing the essay in the 90s, that number is down to 1.5%. I think we're familiar with the idea that rural populations are declining, but we don't maybe take seriously enough how significant that change is really for the whole country. David Orr goes on to say that he thinks people will eventually will be coming back to rural areas, but will eventually probably be, in some ways, forced to come back because of increasing population and decreasing resources in the city, that people will eventually going to be coming back to rural areas. The problem is we want people that will come back intentionally with the idea of caring for places and incorporating into communities and creating neighborly economies. And to that end, he says that for this positive idea of re-ruralization to occur, he says, quote, "Among the most practical things that the young will need to know about, agriculture is by far the most important." So, to that end, let's see if we can't learn something about agriculture. And so I'm going to start with Jane and Jason and turn the conversation over to them. So I wanted to start, either one of you could go first, but let's just hear a little bit, briefly, if you could describe your farm or ranch, where it is, and sort of something of what you do, and yeah, whatever you want to say.
Go ahead,
Well, thank you for this opportunity. I think it's really hard to talk in your own backyard. This would be easier for me if I were 200 miles away, but I do appreciate this chance, and I sat down and made a few notes, partially because I can get sidetracked easily telling stories. But I was really glad for the opportunity to talk about non-industrial agriculture. So I'm very happy for this center here, and I'm looking forward to I wish I was 40 years younger and starting over and could be a part of this, more so than seeing it at the end of my career. A little background that I do want to say is, I've said for a couple of things for many years. One of them is it's never black and white, it's always plaid, and this issue is going to be really plaid. Another one is, and it ties in very well with what Matt said, because I was in that small, dwindling group of people on the farm and ranch, there's nothing wrong with the culture of agriculture. And we need to remember that. And when you're such a small part of the society, you're voting for one thing, to get things changed to help agriculture. We are a very small block. So just keeping in mind that there's nothing wrong with our culture has been important to me. And then another piece that I want to mention before I talk specifically about my operation is that what I do at my ranch works for me. And every rancher up and down my road, if there were that many, but they may all do it differently. And that's because we have different goals, different assets, everything is different. And I mention this because one of the things that we do is patch burning, which means that if I had a 900-acre pasture, I'm only going to burn 300 acres of it in 1 year. And I'm not going to get into the details. This is just to prove my point on how we have to be careful that we don't judge what other ranchers and farmers do or what their practices are. Because people will jump on that and say, well, that'd be great because then we would only have a third as much smoke in the air. But see, it's not true because the third I burn has 3 years of growth on it. So I just say that because I've been in meetings before where someone will go, well, man, if everybody in the Flint Hills patch burned, that would just save us a lot of smoke. Maybe it would, but maybe it won't. And to me, it's really important that we allow anyone in agriculture to try and learn what they're doing and why, because they have a really good reason. They have a reason, whether or not you think it's good. It might be, it might not, but I just, there aren't any pat answers there. And then one other thing I want to say is, when you drive down the road, and I have county roads through most of my pastures, you get to see the work I do. I might not get to look in your office or your workspace and see the work you do. So not only, this is whether or not you look out and you see 30 mama cows, but you only see 5 calves, or you look out and my soybean rows aren't straight, all of those things, our world, our life is very exposed to everyone's scrutiny. So I guess those are just a couple of caveats I wanted to start with. I was born and raised, 4th generations here in Chase County. I came back, I left for a while, and I said, I will never live in Kansas. And I went to Idaho, and I had a ball, and I was out there for about 18 months. And then I came home because I wanted to run a ranch, and I knew I could do that in Kansas. And my sister and I looked at a piece of property that was for sale 8 miles east of here. And we bought that. It was in 79, 80, right before interest rates went to 17%. But the real kicker on this was when the abstract went through the office, our great-grandparents had homesteaded that property in the late 1800s and sold it in 1915 to Larry Patton's family. Larry's here today. These little ties happen. And so it really did feel like a homecoming, and just one where the family didn't keep the land all the time, so it wasn't directly kept within the family, but it felt good. It's all native grass prairie, and we have a cow-calf operation, and I still have cows and calves. My nephew I'm trying to transition out and transition him in, and so we have a lot of summer stockers, and he takes care of all the stockers. And I'd say that our day-to-day work is really more like season to season. And some of this will come out a little later in why we do things the way we do, but you know, 3 questions have really impacted my life. And 2 of them are relative today, but one of them is, the first one, you know, why do we kill people who are killing people to prove that killing people's wrong? That was just a general one. But then somebody asked me one day, Jane, do you want a prairie or do you want a pasture? And that has had a big impact on my management decisions and how I looked at the ranch. And then because we have cows, somebody said, if you really believe in your grass, why would you have your cow have her highest nutritional needs when your grass is at its lowest nutritional output? Now the translation on that is, why are you calving in February instead of May when there's green grass? And that's why I say that the question's more about seasonal, because we're right in the thick of calving now, unlike a lot of traditional ranches, but that's what works for this ranch and the way we manage and what our goals are. So I think that's kind of a basic overview of what it's like on my little piece of prairie.
Well, I'm glad I let my elder go first and maybe moderate my idealistic. My name is Jason Schmidt, and I'm the owner of Grazing Plains Farm. And I turned 41 this past year, and I'm still coming out of my young adulthood idealism and learning that the world is more plaid and less black and white. I still have a tendency to want to go back and think that surely we can be black and white, and there are good ways to do things and bad ways to do things. But yeah, as we age, I think we learn that it is more complicated. So I came back to my family's farm a little over a decade ago, about 12 years ago, I guess now, and I took over my family's dairy farm, or bought the dairy from my parents, and my parents took their crops into retirement, kind of. And so currently I milk, and I should say my farm is 7 miles east of Newton, so west of here about 35 miles or so. And I currently milk about 75 cows and on about 300-ish acres. I came back with a dream of finding a way that the small family farm can stay in business and not all of us have to get big or get out. And it's kind of yet to be determined whether that's true or not, but I still hold out hope that there are creative ways to do that. And one of those ways that I'm trying to explore how to stay relevant as a small farmer is to do more direct-to-consumer marketing. So we, 3 years ago, we started a creamery as part of our dairy farm. So we have a very small licensed cheese creamery on farm where we make artisan cheeses. And it's only possible with a very talented group of cheesemakers that I employ. And I have, I guess an overarching goal of mine is to kind of look towards nature and try to model my farm off of nature. So that means, for me, that means grazing and managed grazing versus, you could also say I'm just not all that mechanical. So grazing works much better for me, and I was that kid who was more interested in the creepy crawlies as opposed to how to figure out how an engine works, which I still don't understand. So I've always kind of gravitated towards ecology and learning how to use my cows to manage the land. So during the grazing season, my cows harvest most of their food through managed grazing. Although I would say that a lot of my grazing or my farming ideals still live in my brain, and I'm still figuring out how to manage the land better each year. So that's my farm in a nutshell.
Good, thanks. That's great.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Jane had to ask, do I milk 12 months out of the year? I currently do milk 12 months out of the year, although that's one thing, an ideal in my brain is to go towards seasonal dairy farming as well, where I don't milk when the grass isn't growing. But for economics and maybe lack of creativity and lack of other stuff, I haven't quite got there yet.
Good, thanks. Yeah, you've both kind of touched on this a little bit, but just very briefly, I wondered if there was some moment in your childhood or something like in your personal story that made you, you've kind of said that a little bit, but like what drew you back to the farm? Is there a really a moment or something, a memory, an issue? What drew you to farming and ranching?
Well, that was more in my recent history than Jane's recent. So,
it's going to cost him some cheese, I'll tell you.
I would say, first of all, I kind of alluded that I was one of those kids that loved to live down in the creek all summer and catch. I knew every fish and frog and snake and lizard that lived in the area. So nature had always had a big draw on me. It's not a short question for me, or short answer for me. So I'll eventually get there. I would say teenage through young adult years, like Jane, I was kind of running from the farm. I was really interested in doing international work and I was a global peace and justice major at Bethel College in North Newton. So that kind of shows you I was on that trajectory to be a do-gooder in the world, I guess. I don't know if I should use that word, but on that trajectory, that led me to, I spent a year doing voluntary work in South Africa and spent a couple years doing voluntary work after college in southern Colorado and northern New Mexico. And all 3 of those years were spent in rural communities on working with small farming projects because I loved the land. And in those experiences, I started piecing the connection between human health and environmental health. And in understanding those connections, I started questioning how our food is produced, and wondering and exploring different ways of producing food, which led me to find mentors and farmers who were doing things differently, which led me to realize I really love working with animals. I really love prairie ecology, and suddenly things started clicking. I could go home and do this maybe. So eventually, I convinced Carol, my wife, to come back to the home place and give it a shot.
Well, I grew up wanting to be a cowboy. That's really I grew up with horses and cattle. We had cattle when I was growing up. That's what I wanted to do. And when I came back to run the ranch, I don't know, a decade into it or something, one day a friend of mine said, gosh, did you ever think about running a ranch with all women? And feminist that I am, I said, are you kidding? That can't be done. And I just, a couple of years after that, we started a program called Prairie Women Adventures and Retreat. And it was an opportunity for women to come to the ranch during calving, weaning, and branding. So to help us work cattle. I mean, it was a Tom Sawyer deal. It just was. You know, pay me to do my work. Hey, it was simple. But it was also a part of education to me. In some of those ensuing years, one of the shifts that happened was I realized that I wanted to be a cowboy, and it was about cattle, but I also hardly spoke to my father for 10 years. I was so angry at him for the ranch that I had to go learn about the ranch in other places. So I worked with the NRCS, I worked with the Livestock Association, I worked with Kansas Rural Center. I mean, anywhere I could go take a class and learn about the ranch, I did. And in that, the shift happened away from cattle and to the natural resource. And then the Prairie Women part of it was, if we could get urban women to the ranch, then we could talk to our consumers. Because when you hear something on the evening news that says, oh, today the New England Journal of Medicine said red meat does blank, then you're going to back away from our product. And speaking of ancient history, now that Jason's brought up my age, you might remember that Oprah got into it with some cattlemen too back in the day. So that's the era I was living in. And so we started this program called Prairie Women. Well, what happened was I had people ask me questions like, how do you make silage? Because we were backgrounding calves at the time, and I'm like, how do you make silage? You know, you just go out and you chop the corn up and you pack it in a silo and you're good to go. But no, these two women were microbiologists. They really wanted to know how you make silage. So they pushed me to learn more about my business. You know, they had done some research in one of the vaccinations we give, which was just a basic one. But I just was asked questions all the time, and I had to remember that these were our consumers, and they had two issues that they cared about. One of them was animal welfare, and the other one was food safety. The same issues that you ran into, because those are our issues. We all care about that. And so that time with the public was really important to me as a producer. Another piece of that was that we would work cattle all day, and we'd be tired. It'd be the end of the day, and I'd be thinking, okay, let's get this stuff cleaned up and get back for dinner. And they'd be going, Jean, look at that sunset. And I'm like, are you nuts? It's getting dark. But the point was, they were pulling me their direction, just as I was wanting to teach them about my life.
One thing that gives me a lot of hope and excitement is recreating community and around my farm, around the people that have come into my life, and customers who come to buy cheese and milk from my farm, employees that come and go, and the energy that I get from that, and the learning that can happen between me and people that come and go. And one big hope I see is, I think there is a yearning for people to know where their food comes from and to connect with farming. And I often saw it as, early on, I saw it as maybe a failure if I needed to rely more on agritourism. But now I'm seeing it more as a potential bright spot, and that excitement of building those community connections. And since I started the creamery 3 years ago, never have I felt more connected to my community. And in an age where we really silo ourselves in our own little worlds, in our own little political and religious persuasions, food is something that cuts across cultures. And so being someone that gets my food directly to customers allows me to kind of jump out of my own silos and see other people's experiences and have conversations that I wouldn't have. And I'm hoping people who come to my farm wouldn't have had if they don't come out to my place. So that has been really rewarding to kind of culture my own community. How's that?
That was a good one. Well, I'm not going to top that. And I'm not going to try, because I don't have a situation at present to where I sell directly to people very often, because I need to do it in halves and wholes and split halves of beef to do it legally. But it's been hard for me through the years, because we don't do the implants, we don't feed low-level antibiotics. We raise really, really good beef, and then it would just get dumped into the regular industrial path. And so that's always been hard, but it didn't change the fact that that's the way we were going to do it no matter what. It was just the right thing to do, I thought, and still do. But I think one of the things that one of the quotes I always like is to shake the hand of the person who feeds you. And I think more of us, I buy my chicken and pork from another producer that's doing what Jason's doing. I think it's great. And I hope that you all will find at least one commodity that you want to consume and buy it directly from whoever's producing it, because that is going to help make the change. And it's going to give the money back to the person who really did the work. And I think that's what's really important. So I'll just do a Jason commercial and make him feel guilty for calling me old.
So yeah, Jason is going to have we're going to be having cheeses there to taste, and Jason's going to be having some cheese that you can actually buy. You can also sign up for a cheese subscription, cancel all your magazine subscriptions, and get a cheese subscription. We do it, and it's great. It's very great. Let's take just a couple quick questions, and then we can close. Marsha?
Okay, there must be a reason why you have, is it Guernsey cows rather than Holstein? So Guernsey have higher cream and Holstein makes more milk?
I'll repeat the question. So she's asking the particular reason for having a Jersey cow rather than a Holstein. So.
I think my first impetus for going with Jersey is because I wanted to be different than my parents. But no, actually, in all honesty, so Holsteins, the black and white cows that you think of when you think of a dairy farm you're right, they've been bred to pump out the milk like no one's business. And very impressive, but they've been bred to pump out a whole lot of milk in a confinement situation, fed a high grain diet. So I wanted to go away from the confinement situation and do more grazing, so that means I need to look for some different genetics. My wife's only requirement for me dairy farming was that my cows be cute. And
They are very cute.
Jerseys, I think, probably win that award. But Jerseys, they're much smaller, but they are also the most efficient breed in body weight to the amount of milk they produce. And they have much higher components, meaning much higher percentage of fat, cream, and protein. And of course, I started going to Jerseys before I knew I was going to be a cheesemaker. But for cheese making, that is ideal because the more components means the more pounds of cheese you get per gallon of milk. So number one, they're more aggressive and do better on grazing, and I'm actually selecting within the Jersey breed animals that are better suited for grazing. And they're very efficient, and they yield better for cheese. So, and they're cute.
And cute. Back there?
I'm curious, since you talked about how farmers tend to exist in silos and they need to make individualized decisions for their operations, I'm curious, how do you all define the culture of agriculture? What are those shared interests, values, and customs of that particular culture?
Okay, the question is, how do you define or describe the culture of agriculture more broadly?
What are those shared interests,
Shared,
values, customs?
shared interests, customs, values of farmers or
I don't
those in
know,
the
I don't want
agriculture
to answer,
industry.
but I do have, the first thing I thought of was that, that it comes up, individual is the first word you think of with agriculture.
Rugged individualism.
Yeah, but the flip side of that is, you let something happen to a neighbor, and you see that everyone will drop their own stuff to go help the neighbor. So there's a camaraderie or a commitment to the community. And another part of that is, I think, well, Jason came back to his home, I came back my county, my county and my land. So there's, I had someone tell me one time, Jane, you get away with stuff I'd never get away with because everybody here knew your grandparents. But there is some of that to it, I may be crazy, but everybody knows that they knew Grace and Roy, so it's going to be all right. So I think that is part of the community. One of the reasons, when I first thought about that, there's nothing wrong with the culture of agriculture. I was trying to defend agriculture because I just feel like we have gotten the short end of the thing deal sometimes. Because I can remember getting a publication one time from an environmental group that said, are you going to let ranchers continue raping the land? And so I was feeling pressure from the outside about my business, and that was hard for me. So that doesn't answer your question.
Yeah. So
I was thinking.
Yeah, I think there's, Jane and I have both touched on it. There's I will call out some negatives though. There is a deep amount of peer pressure in rural communities. There's all these conflicting
It's
things.
plaid.
It's plaid, yeah. So everyone is looking at what everyone else is doing. And so there's a lot of things driving uniformity, I think, in agriculture. A lot of outside pressures that we're not always even aware of that's driving everyone to do the exact same thing and grow the exact same thing. But there's also a lot of internal pressures too, peer pressure. Man, Earl Butz, back in the, when was he, Eisenhower administration, Secretary of Ag and Eisenhower administration, who said farmers have got to get big or get out. That has been driving farmers for the past century, maybe more than that. And that's still, there's just a deep amount of competitiveness, cutthroatness. Yeah, farmers are living in these tight-knit communities, but we're all eyeing each other's land to see who's going to go out of business next, so who's going to be able to dig into their coffers to pay the overpriced land, to get bigger, to be able to survive, to be able to pay off that $500,000 combine, and it's tough. It's this weird, like we're all looking out for each other, but we're also all vying for each other to get out and get bigger. And that's one thing that I came back wanting to fight against, but man, I still internalize it. When corn planting season comes, I'm in the house getting all restless because my neighbors are out at 10 o'clock running their massive tractors, and I'm wanting to go to sleep, but I feel like I should be out there too. But it's just weird, like we all need to be doing the same thing.
One of the things, I mean, I totally understand that, and I know other people in the state that are doing what Jason's doing more so than what I'm doing. I mean, it's like I believe it, but I'm not here against selling to the public. But I know other people who are, and to step out of that and away from it, and to not read what comes out in the Farm Journal every month, or the Drover's Journal, or Successful Farming, because it's all pushing in the same direction that ends up nowhere. And that's why I think that we do have to slow down and reevaluate. This is an ideal way to begin community discussions. And this didn't happen 30 years ago or 40 years ago.
Although, I mean, Wes Jackson was in the same building, and he was trying to do the same thing 50 years ago.
That's right, but not from already production agriculture. I mean, I totally agree, and we followed Wes because he was here, but people like Wes paved that road for us, made it possible. The Kansas Rural Center, I think, has been a real asset. I have to laugh too about, we had an incident on the ranch last spring with a cow where we had to call the vet, and there were 4 of us standing down in the pens, and I looked at him and I said, you know, when I started ranching, this never would have happened. The landowner was a woman, the cattle owner was a woman, the vet was a woman, and the vet tech was a woman. So we have come a long way in some areas, and we'll continue to do so.
Yeah.
I'm also curious, what are the actions that can be taken by farmers, by policymakers, by consumers to help create a more viable future for operations like yours?
So the question is actions,
Farmers, policymakers, consumers.
that policymakers, consumers, and others can make more steps towards
A more viable future for operations like yours.
more viable future for farmers in general and for the 2 of you in particular.
The damn farm bill, sorry. God, I mean, so yeah, there's, maybe it should all rest in the federal government, but the farm bill just really drives what happens on the ground. It drives farmers to grow these handful of commodities, to rip out riparian areas, to get bigger. I mean, it's not just the farm bill, not just federal farm programs, but that is such a huge driving. And if we can start getting some more climate, rewarding farmers for storing carbon in the soil versus just producing more corn. I think there's tweaks that we could do. It's kind of funny that a lot of rural America is quite libertarian, but every farmer I know is will jump at the latest farm program. So the Farm Bill really will drive that, and we've got to keep on, I don't know how in Kansas, but getting legislators who draft farm bills that include more regenerative farming practices, support small farmers, support non-commodity crops, support climate resilient farming practices.
And how about a more individual or consumer or community level?
I'll let Jane take that one.
And how about then? So that's kind of more at the policy level. What can we do? Yeah.
I really do, and support your farmers. I mean, how many of you buy directly from one farmer at least? Okay, good deal. Keep it up, buy more. But, you know, I mean, because if we can say support the policy thing, but that's still having the government save you. So it's time for us to like pull up our boots, act like rugged individuals. I know, you're surprised I'm saying this. But really, it's not that rugged individualism, it's believing in the community that you believe in. And so if you get your eggs from someone, or you get beef from someone, or you get your mixed greens, which are always what I want to try and find, you know, there's a place for every one of these. And I'll tell you, one of my own prejudices is I used to think you couldn't call yourself a farmer unless you owned a tractor and a combine, until I met garden farmers who were like adamant about being farmers. But at every level, we need to be supporting these producers on the local level and telling our friends about it.
And I agree with you too, Jane.
Well, and I wondered maybe to make the connection a little bit, if that personal community level over time affects, again, the culture, and then it then eventually creates that cultural capacity to where those policy changes, which often aren't possible, you talk about in Kansas, what your environment is, so it has to start somewhere, and sometimes maybe we can't see how that unfolds, but hopefully, possibly, those personal communal actions do, down the road, have larger scale effects.
What Margaret Mead said. Never underestimate the small group of individuals, which in the world it's the only thing that ever happens. I'm not sure I'm quoting it exactly.
Well, I think I do. Yeah, I think we should probably close up. And we would like to try some of that cheese and hear some of the music. And you can also buy some of Ian's art. You can donate to the school. You can listen to some music. And thanks to all of you. That was a lot of fun, and I could keep going for a while here, especially once Jason and Jane get fired up, get them rolling a little bit. But I think we better wrap up. Maybe just as a way to close, I'm going to return to that same essay with just a short quote to kind of wrap things up. So from Dave Rohr again. He continues towards the end of his essay to talk about how practical skills can be integrated, agricultural skills can be integrated into what he's saying, like a liberal arts education, but maybe for our purposes, integrated into arts and community. He says, "We do not live on bread alone. A merely utilitarian landscape cannot sustain the part of us that needs wildness, spirit, mystery, delight, beauty, celebration, and attachment to place. Any effort to re-ruralize that does not come out of a broad vision of humans in the landscape will sooner or later fail, because it does not hold our loyalty and affections for long." So, thanks to all of you for helping to shape our loyalty and affections for the land and for our communities. Thanks.